Welcome, Bitcoiners. Welcome, 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 morning gang, as Bud Perry says. Good morning, gang. P-Man Van letting us know that my hometown of Montreal is getting blasted by a winter storm. P-Man Van, I often do the show in my pajamas. Today I had to change my shirt because I had Montreal Expos shirt on, and I try not to have too many logos on the show, and that's the only reason why I did it. But the Expos, I think, would pass. I think we can do. Oh, but wait. Before we talk about T-shirts and Expos and what else is going on, I got to remind you, in case you didn't notice, the sun came up today, and guess what? Guess what? Bitcoin is still running, guys. We're totally good. We're in the clear. We're in the clear. All that's left to do is have some coffee and talk about what's new. A lot going on today. A lot of funny stuff. We're going to talk about how all the news is funny to Bitcoiners today. Some people might be stressed out, but Bitcoiners, this is a funny day. I don't know why, but all the headlines have come up funny for us today. So we're going to talk about all the funny things. Steve Paris says, good morning. Bitcoin Graffiti gives us a good morning. Bitcoin Graffiti, I did not get to that article you wrote yet. I had intended to, but I'm dealing with some sick kids here at home this morning. So everyone's okay. Don't worry. Normal kid sickness. But it did get into my time and my normal systems this morning, but we're good. No big deal. As you know, what we do to start this show is a little Moscow time, right? And Moscow time is finding the fakest news I can find, but you know, there's another criteria. I can't add the punchline. The news has to be funny on its own, right? That's part of the deal about this Moscow time thing. It's got to be funny on its own. So, you know, we've been following the eggs and the chickens in America and what are we doing about the food and everyone worried about stuff. But the Guardian, you know, the Guardian has, this is the UK newspaper, they have a little new angle here, a different angle on what to worry about. So this is an opinion piece from Emma Beddington. Thank you, Emma. If plants are so intelligent, should we stop eating them? She asks. Recent research suggests plants may be able to learn and communicate. It really put her off of her baked potato. Now, I read the article. They don't really give us any other indication about what we can eat, right? So she's already a vegan, but now the vegetables have feelings too. So we didn't really learn about other ideas. I think she's implying Z-bugs, but I don't know. We don't know. So, you know, watch out for that. Watch out for the food with feelings and the plants with intelligence. And according to The Guardian, that's not a place to get nutrition either. So we're going to have to come up with something totally new. I mean, just totally new, right? We have to have something new. Yeah, bugs have feelings too, Bitcoin Graffiti says. They're not there yet. They're not there yet. They haven't followed the analysis of feelings and its coefficient to eating fully through, right? There's a little more breatharian. Yeah, there's a little more to it, right? There's a little more to it. So the news is, though, Bitcoiners, of course, can laugh at this stuff. We have had Clown World's number for longer than most people. On the show, one of the things we like is cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance, you know it by the feeling times or disgust, or when someone says something you don't even want to look at, you can something, and we're all susceptible to this, right? We all have cognitive dissonance. We all to not have to readjust our worldview every time some notion arrives, right? We like to keep the things we've built in our mind building towards, right? No one is naturally excited about changing their plan. Old Mike Tyson saying, and this applies to all plans, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, right? And it's true. Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. So, you know, when we think about all these things and we think about the anger that comes up when we see stories we don't like, or we see narratives playing out that aren't what we predicted, it's normal for us to have cognitive dissonance. But the good news is Bitcoiners have predicted much of the world we live in today. So the need to readjust your view and your vision and what you predicted is a little less. So because we're on script, right? Because things are proceeding as Bitcoiners have predicted for a long time, We're seeing the misaligned incentives of the fiat system exposing themselves and revealing themselves. And because we're already prepared for this, we don't have to get stressed out about it, right? We don't have to get angry and we don't have to get mad. We can kind of just laugh, right? We can kind of just say, look at how funny this is. And one of the things we talked about yesterday was the battlefront of World War III and how the folks from Bitcoin Twitter who resisted the old regime and stayed there with all of these tactics and techniques and maintained a battlefront of freedom of expression, on behalf of the world, but from a Bitcoin-focused point of view, a Bitcoin-centric point of view, let's say, and survived. And now that things have changed in Twitter, it looks like that was conquered territory, won territory, resisted a siege, and is now able to, help in the war effort to push back. And we've talked a lot about the community notes feature on Twitter and how it works and how it's one of the first things Elon Musk brought in. It actually came from Taiwan, and it was an attempt to get away from the nature of basically troll commenting, right? Anything that gets upvote from a Reddit system or even a Twitter system is looking for extreme points of view. And if the larger tribe with the more extreme point of view enters, you'll ratio and you'll do all those things that people love. It's all funny, right? We're not trying to say don't ratio and don't look at Twitter metrics as they are, or even troll bots and troll boxes and everything that goes on Reddit, upvoting and all that. We're not here to change that today, right? That's all part of the dopamine delivery system that people seem to like, and we're not here to change that yet. In the long term, of course we are, but for right now, we're not here to complain about that. We're just here to complain, or here to underline how funny it is that community notes. So the way community notes is, it actually takes a broad aggregate of opinion. So things that are shared from both sides of the divide, so left and right, blue and red, things that are more widely shared amongst both groups end up getting more amplification. And community notes works that way, where if something comes in and is a complete lie, then the community notes can be engaged because they see disagreement coming from both sides and therefore able to add these notes to it. So this is a great one, right? Because we love school choice debate, right? We're going to have Corey DeAngelis at Bitcoin 2023. He's the biggest school choice advocate in America right now. He's the one who's been running the campaign through states all across the United States since COVID began. What was a pipe dream just a few years ago before the lockdowns is now reality. And Corey DeAngelis was the person to really make it happen. He's the one who didn't take a break during COVID. He was on the offensive the whole time. He called out every single school board, every single school administrator who went too far with lockdowns and didn't put kids first and promoted these Zoom learning situations that were terrible. And then also tried to gaslight everyone in the world by saying, hey, we never locked anyone down. So he's been there with those receipts for a while too. And so, this has been, he was really successful. So we're going to have him at the show. But here's an example of how community notes are working, and it's hilarious, right? So you get someone who comes out and says all these school choice things, right? And you can see the anger already, right? And here's a tweet from her where she says, while you were sleeping, about 500,000 American children were stripped of their right to get a publicly funded education. Today, so he's talking about the vote in Iowa just 2 days ago, which we mentioned on this show, which discussed how Iowa was going to go full school choice, portability of your money, right? So now it is really the voucher system. You take your kid out of the school and they get their coupon for the amount of money they would have gotten through the public school system, usually around $20,000 a year. So you get this coupon, which is now good at other places, and you can spend the money as you see fit. So engaging parents as consumers, not the end game of education. For us on this show, the end game of education is the P2P model we practice in Bitcoin meetups, because the problem with the school choice model, even though it's amazing and way better, it still relies on both parents, or at least one parent as an active customer client, which is great, right? Better than the government as the client and the school system trying to appease the government because they're the ones giving money. Now that parents are engaged as customers, it's excellent for the system, right? So 100% for it. Inevitably, we have to move to a model. As much as I want to promote family and all that, it's good. It doesn't actually take care of the problem of educating absolutely everybody, right? We have, unfortunately, lots of broken homes, broken hearts, broken all that kind of stuff. We got to fix them. So the Bitcoin P2P model works, and Bitcoin meetups, eventually Bitcoin shows, where you can commercialize some of these ideas when you're sort of off the mat as far as just getting oriented in this world, which you can do for free at any Bitcoin meetup, right? They'll help you get set up for financial literacy and all those kinds of things. So here, and that's the model. But here, here she comes out. This is an organizer, right? Someone who would have been able to put this kind of nonsense into the world, right? Which would have just, had there not been something like community notes. So she writes this thing, right? All these kids were stripped of their education. Luckily, she got fact checked by the community note system, right? So the community note system engaged and said, we wanted to add context that you might want to know. Student education in Ottawa is still publicly funded. In fact, more funding has been added to the budget covering the law. Advocates say public money should fund students. Opponents say funding should stay in public schools. That's all. It's that simple, right? So whereas this message, which would have just lit brains on fire in every direction, is now blunted. It didn't get to go anywhere. And in this context, we can finally laugh at the liars, right? Whereas just a little while ago, this would have even got me a little angry, right? What the fucking lies are going on here, right? How terrible. Who's going to check her? We don't have a media. We don't have any capacity to check this. What are we going to do about it? Now, it just blunts the entire trajectory of this kind of lie. And not everyone's adapted yet. Luckily, we've adapted. We can just laugh, right? She's done. Deidre, DeGear, you're done. You're finished, right? And it obviously doesn't end there, right? There's way more stuff we can laugh about. People are stressed about war right now. And of course, it's real, right? There's hypersonic missiles and ships moving around the world now. And everyone's talking about the tanks and where the tank's going and all those kinds of things. But, still, we predicted on this show that a long time ago that the fiasco of the weapons and the changing asymmetric force of different weapons in the world are changing warfare as it is. But nevertheless, right, we can still find humor. So it turns out that Putin, and remember the arms dealer that Biden traded a little while ago? Remember he traded that arms dealer for the basketball player who was smoking the pot, which we're fine with, absolutely, right? No problem with that. But she got arrested for it because you're not supposed to do that in Russia. And I'm sure it was all political, of course. But remember, it was a 1-for-1 swap, right? And it was clear. Karine Jean-Pierre said they valued the prisoner's makeup, let's say, right? They valued that she was a NBA celebrity or WNBA celebrity. I'm not sure there is such a thing, but she's a WNBA celebrity. And they made the trade, right? So now the guy that she was traded for was like one of the greatest arms dealers in the history of the world, they say, right? Like one of the greatest. He was in American prison. So it turns out when we traded him, he got back to work. Like he's back to work, right? And what is he buying? All of the weapons the United States left in the evacuation of Afghanistan in 2021. So there was about $7 billion worth of aircraft, vehicles, everything, and the Russians are going to buy it all. And so this guy, put the good deal together that we let out. And now it turns out that the United States is actually arming both sides of the fake war. So you've got the guy who was in our prison who left and is buying American weapons to combat the American weapons we're giving to Ukraine. So, I mean, like, people are going to die. We don't like that, right? We're very anti-war, but a bunch of weapons having like American weapons orgying with each other and and all the people who would follow this, caught up in it. Now, I'm not going to Ukraine anytime soon, right? And I don't like hypersonic missile capacity boats off the coast of America. For sure, I don't want any of that stuff. But it's still kind of funny that this is happening. It's funny. What are you supposed to say? It's funny, right? It's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's funny. What about markets and all that stuff, right? So, we don't have, on this show, we've been saying for a long time that for us to recognize that we're in World War III and that we can win World War III, part of the definition of that is that USA Inc. doesn't win, right? We've set up the frame several times that in World War II, the story was America won, but Americans kind of lost. Right? Americans kind of lost. We got some stuff, But in the end, we became this massive consumer base in order to fund the war machine, right? Which was a deliberate decision, which I'm not saying was a wrong decision, but we were certainly not supposed to offshore industrial capacity. The point of being consumers was that we had the industrial capacity maintained to turn into a war machine in case we needed it. But we let that go. We just became consumers, and then we exported the manufacturing anyway. So we don't really even have much of the war capacity that we had years ago industrially coming out of World War II. It was naturally lost to globalization. I mean, the microchips, the parts that go into this vehicle and that vehicle, it's all globalized, right? That's what all these trade deals were. You build this many pistons and we'll give you rubber. And it was, America just did guns for butter all over the world, right? It was guns for butter all over the world. But the truth is America has its own agricultural base, right? We're still in a great position because America does still have all the food. Foreign policy still is a sport to us because of that reality. And we play games like we've played in Ukraine and Afghanistan. So things changing there. And that's something Bitcoiners have predicted a long time ago. A major part of the Bitcoin worldview was to stop the funding of war through the fiat mechanisms. And watching basically fiat fight fiat in this context is funny. It just is. And now all the stuff, about the side of it. So it's not just that fiat is fighting the wars, it's also further corrupting Congress, which we know we are not, as we say, we want America, the institutions, to lose and the people to win, right? That's a big difference from World War II to World War III. And Americans time to win World War III just because of their access and even, right? Americans way ahead on Bitcoin, still the largest penetration of any country, I think, right? Still working towards it. But there's some parts of the Bitcoin world, especially our love for American institutions, which can hold us back, right? A love for the dollar, for example, can be a crippling debilitation as a Bitcoiner. And then not being able to admit that the system itself is rotten, right? The system itself is rotten. And one of the ways we can start admitting that is by laughing at things that are going on. And this Nancy Pelosi Act, right? I don't know if you guys heard, but Josh Hawley, there's the WTF committee going on looking into all the weaponization of the federal government in communications, but that's not it, right? The Pelosi Act is going to stop folks from, like Nancy Pelosi, from trading while they're sitting congressmen. So remember, the mainstream media made it sound normal to us a year ago, and Nancy Pelosi was even able to say this out loud. Well, it's a free country and I'm a free citizen. Why shouldn't I be able to why shouldn't I be allowed to trade? And as many Bitcoiners do, we've been following the Nancy Pelosi stock tracker on Twitter for a long time. And just as the Department of Justice, which we mentioned on the show yesterday, opened up this antitrust lawsuit against Google, Pelosi sold $3 million of stock just a couple of weeks ago, right? You can't make this stuff up. It's really funny, right? It's really funny. Now, to have expected anything less than corruption from these people was a mistake in the first place. We're here for the clown world, right? We're here for Nancy Pelosi saying straight face to the world, I'm allowed to trade too, and then going ahead and just bucketing and dumping $3 million, right? It's why we believe that getting wrecked in the financialized, engineered Wall Street market is still one of the best ways to understand Bitcoin. Because once you see the corruption like this, it's hard to not want something else. And as we regularly say, the way the human mind works isn't like Ben Shapiro said, facts don't care about your feelings, as he says, right? We know on this show, it's the opposite. Feelings don't care about facts. If people are feeling like this is good because they're also making money, then they're going to continue with it. But if they see and feel like this is so unfair, there's finally a chance for change, right? So one of the best orange pills there are out there, right, is this Pelosi Act and what that can actually bring. Now, cities, people are saying, were the main economic engine of the fiat era, right? Everyone moved to cities. Cities were the place to be. The real estate was good. Make sure all comments are coming. So I had to go down on my comments to make sure I hadn't gotten into any sound and audio ones. Let me know if there's any audio trouble. So we know that the cities have been the main economic engine. Everyone's talked about the rural demographic shift over the last 100 years, 150 years in America and around the world, right? People leaving cities, leaving the countryside, going into cities, and cities becoming overcrowded in some cases. Now, America shouldn't normally fall into that situation, just because the population density in America is still quite low compared to everywhere else. But nevertheless, the American cities completely crumbling, right? You know, this Chicago story. So in Chicago, the mayor, Lori Lightfoot is her name, right? She really looks like, you know, people always share these pictures of her looking like a Gotham City villain. You ever see these people you ever see this collection of pictures of American politicians and how much some of them look like Batman villains, right? Gavin Newsom can look like the Joker sometimes, right? And this girl, Lori Lightfoot, maybe the Penguin, I'm not sure. She looks pretty nuts. So she gave everyone in her city advice of the day, right? And it was, don't go out with cash. That's the only way to keep from getting mugged, right? So that's maybe a bullish argument for Bitcoin. I don't know. I don't know. But it looks more like a CBDC message, of course. And, you know, Chicago, of course, dealing with massive homicide rates. It's a war zone, right? It's an absolute war zone over there. But it's not just American cities, right? It's not just American cities. You get the European cities that are trying out. Another one in England now is going to try out the 20-minute barrier, right? You can't leave further than 20 minutes from your home city. Further than 20 minutes from your house. Sorry, not your home city. Let me see the story here. So they're going to stop folks from being able to, where did I put it? I had the story saved somewhere here. Anyway, so it's another one of these British, you know, like we talked about in Oxford, you get a 15-minute corridor from your home and sectors, and you can't leave your sector but for a couple of times a week, right? One of these, yeah, here it is, 20-minute neighborhoods hitting my country of Norfolk, right? There are no significant traffic emissions in rural Norfolk, and this key industries are farming and tourism. This is about restricting movement, and it won't be voluntary. So it's not even in a major city. Wow, that sort of defeats my context here. But nevertheless, England, right, just like the Chicago situation, will go get taxed. Luckily, working on it, right? They're going to get their CBDC up and running. There's a job posting right now. If any of you are interested, there's a job posting at Her Majesty or His Majesty's Treasury right now, right? His Majesty's Treasury, the head of central bank digital currency, right? So the head of they're hiring this person right now. The head, they're only going to pay this person, it turns out, $75,000 US a year. Who do you think you're getting? Now, no, you know, it could be plenty of money to some people, right? And I'm not looking down on salaries or anything like that, right? That's not the point here. Just put it in context, though, against whom they're competing, right? If you look at the people in Bitcoin who are building all of this stuff, no one's getting paid to do what looks like a pretty important job, right? No one's getting paid that kind of money. Anyone who has any of these skills is getting paid much more money already in a major Bitcoin outfit or even one of these crypto things, right? Because these guys still pay. There's no doubt about it. They still pay. And when you think of who they're going to get, right? When you think of who is even going to show up for this, and you start imagining, you know, you got places like Chicago, don't go out with cash. There's no reason why. People would want to stay in cities for much longer. And indeed, you can see all kinds of people reorienting their lifestyle. I was talking to the beautiful Natalie Brunel yesterday, telling me, and we had a Zoom call. We were chatting about doing our podcast one day, and she was mentioning she just moved from LA to St. Louis. And St. Louis is still a city full of crime, but nevertheless, in that part of the world, you start getting access to the good food. You start getting access to where you can see your cows, right? You can't get that in LA. It's impossible, right? It's another one of these cities that doesn't even really have a immediate countryside, even though the skiing and outdoor activities near LA are pretty good, right? For a major city, it's not really the rural farm life nearby, the fruit stuff and all that, right? Some nuts, I guess, maybe, but not a way that you can feed your family and be sure of everything you're eating, and the scale of course of that place is so different. And we're going to talk more in a sec about getting people in rural places, right? And even the idea of being able to laugh or taking something seriously. Everyone going on about these statues, the MLK. Some people call it like holding feces, or some people, there's a statue they built. If you didn't see this in Boston, everyone talking about it, right? It's supposed to be MLK hugging his wife. Some picture that was taken when he won the Nobel Prize, right? The Nobel Prize. The statue is awful, right? Some points of view, it looks like a boner. Sometimes it looks like a boner. Sometimes it looks like a log of poo, depending on which angle you take it from. It's just the arms, right? It's just, sometimes it looks like a fellatio, right? Depends on the angle. It can just look, pretty, explicit from several angles. And everyone's been laughing about that for days, but New York City had to do them one better. So on a courthouse, they erected a new statue yesterday, right? So they erected a new statue yesterday. Some people said it was inspired by RBG, or just to get a new motif up there. And, normally on top of this public court would be, sort of Greco-Roman statues of justice and previous icons of religious stuff, and all kinds of stuff. So they put up this new gold statue, and it's got the horns that look an awful lot like a ram, like an awful lot like a Satanist ram, and then no arms. Again, another one of these pretty close to ancient Sumerian aesthetic. And you get Andrew Beck here saying, a new statue atop a New York City courthouse. The artist says it's part of an urgent and necessary cultural reckoning underway as New York considers traditional representations of power in public spaces and recasts civic structures to better reflect 21st century social mores. So in the end, it just looks like a Satanist thing specifically designed to troll Christians. I mean, honestly, that's what it looks like, right? And again, as Bitcoiners, right, we can sit back and not get trolled, not start getting angry about statues put up and what's going on with this and who would pay for these statues. Of course, we know that these are just more expressions of clown world, right? They're just clown world doing its thing. And folks who don't have that frame, who still allow themselves to get jacked and pushed by these kinds of things, are just going to keep losing, just like the people who embrace these things. Imagine having to talk yourself into idolatry. I mean, it is idolatry, right? In the end, if you put up a statue like that, the other ones were probably idolatry too. We haven't really reckoned with it. Who knows? But clearly there's issues with this, right? There's clearly issues with this. And of course, Bitcoiners are some of the first people in the world that understood the context of what was going on with Epstein and all of that world. Because when you get into this ancient Sumerian stuff, right, naturally it comes along with all kinds of other implications, connections, and connotations. And I don't know if you guys caught this, but Tucker Carlson did a really interesting show last night, and it actually cleared something up for me. And this is what it cleared up. So I did a lot of content around the SBF original arrest, right? And I've mentioned for a long time that my viewpoint, my bird's eye viewpoint of how SBF came up, what was going on at the time, was really unique. I saw and found SBF really early, casting for shows when I was with CoinDesk. and found him by seeing Alameda at the top of the leaderboard on BitMEX. I knew he was a big BitMEX trader. So once I noticed that, I I asked him to come to the show. He didn't, but Three Arrows was up there too. So I did get Suju that year to come and talk about what they were up to. So when I moved over to Kraken and was working on the strategy team, we were a tight little team, and we reported directly to the CEO about ideas, things that could be as crazy as we wanted. We had full control. We didn't work for any other department. If you know anything about how some corporate structure might work in normal exchanges or in banks or whatever, we were not sort of a lowly strategy department. We were really there to inform and keep the CEO protected from bad ideas and to see the things that were coming that were important. So a lot of my time already years ago went into making the case for proof of reserves, right? Saying that in the end, all of this BlockFi stuff will wash out, which I said, 3 years ago now, this is all going to wash out. And really when it was, I was making the case heavily in 2020 as the first lead up with this collateralized market was going crazy up until Christmas 2020. And I was saying, more or less, we have to think about the future because all of this cash they're getting, it only makes sense for us if we can get, when we had the bank license, to get the discount window money, which was free at the time, right? You can get free money from the Fed at the time. No cost, right? And just borrow. So I said, for us economically, it only makes sense if we get that because these things are tricky, right? And risk management here is wild. So I made the point that once it blows up, the most important data point that will come out is going to be proof of reserves. And I was right about that. So everyone now talking about proof of reserves. And of course, which company has no questions about its auditing, procedures less than the others, right? There's still work to do, but I can attest that they're on the right path and are going to get there. It's Kraken, right? Everyone else has these, what's going on with the balances and people trading all kinds of stablecoin overnight, which is normal, right? That is sort of normal. But in the case of Kraken, of course, they took the tool seriously. They didn't spend time on all this collateralization. Now, I'm sure there's other parts of the company that, I only knew projects and things that we could do or shouldn't do. But all that to say, I was studying FTX closely at the time, market sizing them in that summer of 2020, because they did come out of nowhere. And I was wondering how, right? I was wondering how. Now, I knew that they had copied the BitMEX tool exactly, right? They were a big player on the BitMEX platform. It seemed natural to me that they would create their own platform. Instead of the BitMEX 100x leverage, they did the 101x leverage, right? So it was already a copy-paste tool. And when SBF started his prediction markets, right, he started a prediction market at the same time, I said, these prediction markets, I recommended to everyone at Kraken that we copy it. Now, the reason I recommended we copy it is because I believed they were going to get a ton of attention because the 2020 election was going to be hung, right? No one was going to know when the election ended who won. So of 2020, and the election was in November, I knew we were not going to get an answer to that, right? There's not going to be a winner. It's going to be a state of confusion. This election is going to lack credibility. And it's going to be a news spin war, a psychological war in the immediate aftermath. But I said there's an opportunity for an exchange like us because they're not going to have data sources. And I made the case that to Kraken that FTX was about to get a lot of attention because they had the only prediction market for the 2020 US presidential election. And it was global. And they had not a lot of volume, but $1.5 million. And I said, we can easily get to there because FTX was not a very famous exchange yet, right? Not even close. And so I made the case at that moment that we should copy the market and create one of our own, which in the aftermath of the election might allow us to get all that attention around the world, right? Everyone just saying, look, Kraken's market says this, Kraken's market says that much. So I was sure it was a good idea. We didn't do it for, normal reasons, right? There's a lot going on in that period in 2020. Michael Saylor bought his first Bitcoin and there was all kinds of stuff happening, right? So hard to really say whether or not we should have done the product because I didn't understand what would happen next. What happened next is what I think Tucker Carlson is talking about yesterday, maybe in some ways, right? What Tucker Carlson is talking about yesterday. And it relates to the statue that's in New York and Epstein and what everyone's talking about. So I'll get to it. What happened next was Arthur Hayes gets arrested by Bill Burr, right? And not only does he get arrested by Bill Burr, they release a how-to guide with every single prosecution that's ever happened in crypto and the way it happened, right? So every prosecution with basically a one-pager on every prosecution, what provisions they prosecuted under, how they did it. And then they got Arthur and more or less warned they were going to do it to other people in the document. And meanwhile, I'm looking at FTX and I'm saying, well, how is it that that's the same product? It's the 101x leverage machine and the 100x leverage machine. And all they got Arthur Hayes on was bank secrecy, which was he didn't do enough to prevent criminals from using his platform. Well, what is FTX doing? I looked into it. I couldn't tell, right? You can, exchanges have sort of a privileged view of each other. And I couldn't see what he was doing differently from my point of view. And using all of our back-end data and understanding about flows and which wallets we suspect were from other entities. There's a lot of forensic stuff going on inside an exchange to understand what the other exchanges are doing, right? That's a natural, I think, part of the whole crypto world, right? And so I couldn't quite understand why they would threaten Arthur Hayes in the document and then allow a copy-paste product to exist in the same jurisdiction at the same time. But then I uncovered, as did many people, that SBF was the largest Biden donor in the world, right? Or the second at the time. And then the election happened, right? And I couldn't understand how Bill Burr was involved in something that funding went to the Biden campaign, but how could he have benefited so much from government policy when they're two apparently different parties, right? That was something that bothered me. And then, of course, I was correct. FTX got a huge boost after the election in that everyone cited the FTX prediction markets around the world. All the major media did. And as I suspected, it became a data point beyond the speculation and the mind reading that the news was forced to air for days after the election. This became a tangible thing. And the cognitive closure, as we say regularly when we're talking about persuasion here, was always introduced as look at the non-sentimental, right? Look at the gamblers who don't care. Look what they say about the election. And of course, I knew they cared. I knew he had his finger on the weights. And am I taking crazy pills? Am I the only one who sees some form of corruption? And of course, there was so much going on in the world that it was difficult to be signaled on. But I, at that point, began, more or less a campaign to understand more of what was going on inside of that situation over at FTX and find out where the corruption went. In the end, it became pretty public. I had no idea it was a house of cards underneath the hood, right? I didn't know about the fraud and all those things, but I knew about the collusion and I knew about the privileged channels, let's say, right? And it always bothered me, my ability to understand exactly where Trump ends up going wrong when it came to the Assange, Snowden, and Ross stories, right? Because that's where I abandoned Trump and remain completely not interested in what he's selling because of his last day in office, where these people weren't pardoned. And I think Tucker starts getting to the bottom of it right here. So Tucker's monologue demanded answers about Epstein and called out AG Barr's investigation. Here's what he says. 3.5 years after Epstein died, no one has gotten to the bottom of what happened. And this is in the light of what we said yesterday with the Ghislaine saying he was killed, right? So we said that on the show yesterday. We covered that part. Tucker Carlson, the only people who liked Jeffrey Epstein were his friends, and some of them are clearly happy he's dead. And he mentions Bill Gates, who records how he spent quite a bit of time with Jeffrey Epstein after he became a registered sex offender. Tucker Carlson says, this week we've called virtually every person involved in the story. No one wants to speak with us. And Attorney General Barr refused to come on the show. And here's him looking into a bit of the details, right? So Barr's father served in the OSS, which was the CIA's predecessor. He was the headmaster. His father was a headmaster where he hired Epstein at 21 years old, right? So this college that hired Epstein, the headmaster was Bill Barr's dad. And in 1973, Bill Barr published Space Relations, a science fiction novel about a planet ruled by oligarchs who engage in slavery. This stuff up. You can't make this up, right? Now, I haven't fact checked, but this is what Tucker Carlson is saying, right? This is what he's saying. And if you go back and wonder about Bill Barr and what he was doing and who he's working for, right? This brings up serious questions. Now, I always thought that Trump had a million people around him that were giving him bad advice. And of course, that's normal, right? Everyone wants to get to that person. But you wondered just how much stuff could be done sort of off script. And this story shows that there's a lot of capacity out there for that. And, that's what's going on, so, but the good news is we can laugh about it, right? We see, because our vantage point comes through SBF, comes through crypto, comes through shitcoins, comes through all of these different angles that we've been exposed to already, our ability to intellectualize what's happening in corruption internationally is way better, right? Now, I interviewed Eric Weinstein in 2019 about Bitcoin. And I was lucky enough to have a conversation with him off camera about Epstein. And, his take on it always was that, as someone who was an allocator, Eric Weinstein, dealing with Teal Capital's money, right? The way that works is everybody sends you their deck, right? Everybody. That's how it works, right? Like if someone knows you have money, they send you their deck, right? That is the, you know how many times that happens at Bitcoin conferences, right? That's like half the traffic at Bitcoin conferences is people trying to meet people who have money to allocate in their idea, which is normal. We love that, right? We do a lot to facilitate those interactions, and we encourage them and want them to happen. It's a normal part, right? But here's what Eric Weinstein said. When Eric Weinstein first met Epstein never followed up to get the money. And he said it's the first ever serious person who's looking for allocation, right? Fund manager who never followed up. The first one ever. He's never experienced that before, where there was no follow-up. There was literally no one who said, great to have met you last night, give me money, right? It just never happened. And he never stopped questioning how weird that was. And then when he saw all the stuff, he realized very quickly, this is part of a operation, right? This is some form of operation. Now, we don't know the details on the operation. We don't know, right? We've seen the Babylonian massage structure he has on the island. That's real. It's very aesthetically similar to the statue they put up in New York City, right? In its own way. It certainly was of the ancient aesthetic order, right? Which we're not saying is even a problem necessarily, unless you get into the world of what they say is involved, the child stuff, right? But at least we have a context for that, right? And we see all of these stories that are entertaining about our ancient history and a reason why those things are being seen as dangerous, right? For us, the funny part is watching people say that ancient apocalypse is dangerous. All those fake news stories we got for a long time on the show, talking about Graham Hancock, the most dangerous man alive, right? I mean, that's funny. It's funny. And important stuff for us to learn, right? Really important stuff for us to learn. And when you think about, cities and this where they were and how people organized around them, and how, because of the social pressures of a city, what Eric Weinstein just mentioned was kind of rare, right? He's a city dweller, a New Yorker, LA guy, and would go to these parties with folks who are near finance. I've been to a million of them. My time at CoinDesk in New York City is more accurately described as my time on Wall Street, right? I was a Bitcoin advocate on Wall Street. And that was the community I operated in. Wall Street media. I went on all the main media stations all the time. I used the New York Stock Exchange regularly as a TV studio, right? It is a TV studio. You go in and they check you, and there's some trading going on, but everyone there is more or less an extra in a set. And I did that stuff for years. So you get a sense of how it works, and you get a sense of how social pressure works, and how the city takes on a sort of life of its own, and a culture and a community of its own. And so for Eric to recognize behavior that was aberrant within that community was a astute observation, and normal, and shows just how smart he is. But that's sort of the good news, right? We get a lot of people now, and Bitcoiners especially, with the worldview of focusing on health, of focusing on getting rid of the industrial food complex, starting to scale down how they live, and now sharing information on how to live rural, right? So that's starting to happen all the time. The whole Citadel mindset, which we're already prepared for. We were talking about getting out of the cities way before it was a necessity, right? And now it's a necessity. When I was in New York City in 2019, it was sort of the golden age in some ways, right? In my last year in New York City, there were more murders in London, England, than there were in Brooklyn, which was the first time in the history of either country, right? It just never happened. So that we were becoming even more peaceful, and it was safer and safer and safer. New York has changed. I liked the energy when I was there in October. I'm not trying to cast just a violence versus not, but of course there is a way more violent activity and random stuff and all that. But it's leading this push into rural stuff. And here's a guy who wrote a piece on startup cities, how to be rural in tech, right? Why I don't ever meet. So just talking about how it's starting to change, and that's something that I've jumped in 2 feet first, and one of the reasons why I embrace the Nakamoto Trail that I mentioned on a podcast I did the other day, and getting down to small communities, and where you can actually make the place beautiful, right? Where you can have a real impact, and it's about making your small town. So to paraphrase his article, it's like, how do we, as people who are used to urban lifestyle in some sense, but also a very beautiful and aesthetically pleasing environment around us, right? My town in Vermont needs a lot of work, like a lot of work, right? It's typical of all the hollowed out New England towns. We've got to make Main Street interesting again for people to move there. I think electric bikes are going to be the key to that. I think getting around all these small towns in a way that's quiet and cheap and efficient and a little slower is how we're going to get there. Education in small towns is also changing, right? Once I get my bike store set up in my little town, and I'm selling e-bike parts and components and full bikes and trikes and golf carts at the head of the rail trail, I plan on opening a school, and the school will simply be folks who help put on events, physical events in the area, and we'll actually do the events, right? It'll be races with the electric cars and all, just using the mountains and the rivers and planning events to bring people to downtown, like races, running races, all that kind of stuff. And then those people can take those skills as professionals after and help the area to have even more capacity for events and people to benefit from where you are, right? And then I think in the end, that will start cultivating all of these geniuses out of our rural areas. And we won't need to meet in the city to bring money and talent and ideas together. It'll happen much more naturally in a rural environment in the way that it used to, right? I mean, look at what America got out of rural folks to begin with. Mark Andreessen, right? He's a rural guy. You know, we talked about Bob Noyce, the mayor of Silicon Valley, who I argued a few weeks ago on the show is the most important person to live in the 20th century. And I think he might be, right? He invented the microchip. He invented the West Coast business model. And because of that, he was in a position to create Intel and then to be Steve Jobs' surrogate father to help get a microchip in everyone's pocket. So the person who created the business model, the microchip that made so much possible in the digital world, and then the consumer applications for individuals. I mean, this is a major contribution to the 20th century, right? Grew up on a potato farm, right? Just a potato farm. And you're going to see more of that, right? You're going to see more and more of that. All right, team. That's all I got for today. Let's see if I got some comments here. Yeah. So about this, he's talking about Dave. Yeah, exactly. So that they're going to pay the CBDC guy. I mean, a fast food manager, like as someone who would even book for events, right? So I book people for events. Now, not to say I don't care about someone's salary when I book them for an event, but I know the quality of person you usually get from an enterprise at that, like Deloitte or something at that pay level. And usually they're like writing the emails back and forth for the person I'm booking, or generally, right? And even then, the folks making, 6 figures, let's say, generally not guaranteed to be in a spot where they can say anything interesting for me to make news. Like if their role is, we have a bunch of NDA and experiments, but we're a cool government brand name, I don't put those people on stage. I haven't done that in 5 years. They're not interesting enough for me, right? So there you go. Swan and Unchained BTC native. Yeah, exactly. Better than proof of reserves. Daniel, Eye of the Sahara. Yeah, we love it. We will reforge it with a Bitcoin mine. That's what we're after. All right, team. Cheers.